So, good morning. Do we still say good morning? I don't know. Good morning and hello, everybody. My name is Albert Kehrer, and I'm on the board of PROUT at Work, and I'm honored to have Claudia Brind-Woody from IBM today with me, who agreed to join me for this lunch talk. Hi, Claudia. Great to have you here.
Hi, Albert. It's good to be here.
Excellent. I'm really happy to have you in this call. This lunch talk is part of our Proud Performer project, where we want to give out senior people visibility and discuss what it needs to be a role model. Later this year in June, we will also publish lists of out executives from Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, as well as executive allies and proud voices, what we call engaged LGBT employees. Claudia is, for me, quite a famous person, and she's well known. She is the IBM Managing Director for the Walgreens Boots Alliance integrated account, where she leads the IBM team in both Europe and in North America. Claudia has been with IBM since 1996 and has held multiple global roles during her tenure, including work in Finland and the United Kingdom. Prior to her current role, she was the Vice President and Managing Director for IBM Global Intellectual Property Licensing, where she, and this is really impressive, where she delivered more than 3 billion of profit to IBM through IP partnerships, which is really impressive. Claudia is an accomplished speaker who has done keynote speeches on LGBT diversity throughout the world, and I've known her for 15 years. It always gives me goosebumps. My personal experience is that Claudia's speeches are touching. And as said, they cause goosebumps, so expect some goosebumps. She also contributed to some interesting books about the LGBT community and business. One of them you might all know. It is The Glass Closet, Why Coming Out is Good for Business, by the former CEO of BP, Lord Brown. Book I can very much recommend. Claudia also serves on the advisory boards of Workplace Pride, our sister organization in the Netherlands, the Gay Star News. She also served on the board of directors of Out and Equal and Lambda Legal. And she has a number of awards she personally won. It's probably not all of them, but it sounds very impressive, Claudia, really. In 2011, she received the Out and Equal Trailblazer Award and was listed on GO Magazine's 100 Women We Love, definitely one I love. In 2012, she was included in The Guardian's World Pride Power List Top 100. In 2013, she was listed number 6 on the Financial Times LGBT Role Models. In 2014, she was number 10 on the list, and in 2015, number 5. In 2015, she was also listed as number 2 on the Telegraph's Media Group's Out at Work LGBT Top 50 Executive. And most recently, she was included in the Diva Power List and named to the Financial Times LGBT Role Model Hall of Fame for 2016. Very impressive. Claudia, again, a very warm welcome, and thanks for taking your time to have this chat with me.
The pleasure's mine, Albert. It's good to catch up.
Excellent. For the audience, if you come up with questions, please do not hesitate to ask them to us via the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom app. We will certainly try to answer them at the end of the session. So I think let's start and use the time to get some valuable insights from you, Claudia. Why is the LGBT IQ topic so important to you?
Well, first of all, I'm a member of that community, right? And growing up, I had no role models in the LGBT plus community. And so it's important to me to be a role model, to make the way easier for others who are coming behind us, or folks in countries where it's really hard to be LGBT plus. So it is an important topic. because part of it, it's who I am. It's existential to me, but it's not all that I am. It's just a part that, because I've claimed it, it makes me whole, right? So to leave that part out of my daily life would be to be less than I could be.
Yeah, I fully understand. When did you come out? Can you share, and what do you want to share? And how did your colleagues react?
Sure. Well, certainly coming out is a journey. It's not something you do once and you're done, right? So with IBM, I came into IBM as an out executive, right? I was the number 3 out executive at IBM, and they were delighted to have a third one, right? And for me, coming out has been something I share with people as an ordinary experience, because if I am ordinary, if I'm having that kind of outing conversation, in ordinary conversation where people are talking about their families or what they did on holiday or for the weekend or whatever, if I'm saying, oh, my wife Tracy and I did such and such, just like anybody else would talk about their family doing on holiday, and doing it in an ordinary way, that coming out is very comfortable. It's very ordinary, and people react in a very ordinary way, and time and time again they'll say, oh, okay, tell me about riding horses in Wyoming. They're not stuck on the fact I just said my wife and I went on holiday in Wyoming. They want to know about the holiday, just like ordinarily we had asked somebody about their own holiday. So that coming out journey for me, the more ordinary I make it, in whatever conversation people have as they connect as humans, right? The easier it is, not only for me, but for everybody else to hear, to receive, to take it as ordinary. Now, earlier in my career, when I was working in the US in sport at university, we were very circumspect, and the women were closeted, because in sport at that point in time, the men didn't want to share the facilities. They didn't want to share the court time or any of the budget. And so one of the pejoratives, one of the discriminatory words they always used for women athletes were, you lesbians, you dykes, even if our women weren't, right? So we were very cautious. We were very circumspect, because at that point in time, it was more important to have opportunities for women in sport than to, be out, right? So that's really the only time in my career I've been closeted. And it was more out of the desire to have opportunity for women.
Times have changed, even in sports, and you said you have some experience in the sports industry. You even worked as an assistant basketball coach.
Yes, yeah.
And recently, a famous former German soccer player advised his colleagues not to come out publicly. What is your opinion on that? And is the sports industry really different than other industries?
So, yeah, the sports industry is behind other industries, I would say, Albert, but you also have to distinguish between men's sports and women's sports, because with men's sports, the men have looked to sports stars as the epitome of maleness, right? This is the perfect male. This is what men should be. This is what it means to be a man. And so a lot of that male identity is attached to sports stars. And so when a male sports star comes out, it really is an act of courage in a different way, because that identity has been so associated with macho maleness. And also there are potential losses of sponsorship dollars. I mean, Martina Navratilova is a perfect example. Being out, she lost sponsorship dollars, but the tale there is that subsequently, as the world has changed, her sponsorship dollars have increased. Her profile as an important person in the world has increased because of her courage. And so those are the kinds of opportunities that not only in sport, but in other places, being one of the first to come out, being a significant player, literally or figuratively, to come out, you enable yourself to be significant, right?
Yeah. I get the goosebumps already, honestly. Another topic is the double discrimination of lesbians, and PROUT at Work financially supported a study where they focused on the double discrimination of lesbians in the recruiting process. Do you have, I guess you don't have a personal experience with this, maybe from former employers, but do you have a thought about this, and how could we work on this?
So I actually do have experience with it. It's not with the employers per se, but it's with the other people you work with. Yeah. But let me comment, and then I'll tell my story. So yeah, there are lots of stories on the double glass ceiling for women who are lesbian. And Stonewall did one of those as well. And being female is visible, and being lesbian not so much, right? We can still hide. And sadly, even in companies like IBM, fewer women come out because they're already discriminated against as women. And again, in our company, not for pay, not for promotions per se, and hopefully not from hiring. We have a really wonderful anti-bias artificial intelligence technology that we're applying not only for ourselves, but for some of our clients in their hiring and promotions and management evaluation spaces, so that we look at anti-bias in that. But even today, I was on a WebEx conference, a video conference with some IBMers, some of whom were not on my team. They were from a different team. We were talking about a business topic. And there was this one, I guess, 40-something-year-old guy who got on and kept talking over me, right? And then I said something, and 5 minutes later, he attributed what I'd said to a male, right, on this conference call. And so some of the guys on my team are slacking him in the back channel, saying, do you not know that this is the managing director you're talking over, right? And the sad part was it took them telling him about my position, my title, for him to step back and go, oops, I'm sorry, right? But his natural inclination was to talk over me, to interrupt me, to attribute what I said to someone else who was male. And I was just amused because that's happened all of my career. And I suspect every woman on this call has had it happen to her. So as LGBT men on this call, one of my challenges to you is to be an ally to your women, all of your women, not just your lesbian or bisexual or trans women, but all of your women, so that you are the voice in the room saying, I'm sorry, that was Claudia's idea. And it's, oh, by the way, it's a good one or a bad one or whatever, but that was Claudia's idea. And oh, by the way, Albert, could you quit interrupting Claudia? You've got to sometimes be that ally at the table or on the conference call that steps in and make sure you're standing up for your colleagues who are women on that call. So sadly enough, it continues to happen to even me today.
To even you in your position, and I think you're quite well known within the IBM, yeah. How can we as members of the LGBT community be role models and maybe also supporters for other marginalized groups who are still fighting, for changes? Stuff we've most probably already achieved.
Yeah, well, I think it's always a journey. So I wouldn't say that any of us have certainly achieved. We may have best practices we want to use and all, but Albert, one of the things we did at IBM last June, June is Pride Month. We had, shifted all of the things. So we had a lot of virtual Pride events. And then we had the Black Lives Matter issues in the States and elsewhere in the world. And so we as an LGBT community at IBM took all of our web video scheduled events and added the topic of Black Lives Matter and invited our Black colleagues to tell their stories about their very painful journeys. Some senior executives were telling stories that just shocked me and made me sad and made me embarrassed. And they shared stories that made me hopeful too. But, part of it is making sure we share our platforms, share our journeys in ways that include other people. And that can be not only in other constituencies, but also in other countries. You in Germany may be far ahead of Poland or Hungary and need to be role models, need to be mentors or sponsors for folks there. And part of what I do to challenge all top executives is to make sure we ask them to be a sponsor, an ally, a mentor, an advocate for a group that's not like them. So, a man sponsoring a women's group, or an LGBT person sponsoring or participating in the Black group or the Hispanic group or whatever, people with disability, making sure we bring our and understand our common humanity to the table, because at the end of the day, we're more alike than we're different. And many of our experiences resonate with others. And we can learn from others as much as they can learn from us.
We have this first question coming in, and it fits a little bit into what we just were talking about. Recently, California has introduced a quota on underrepresented groups in the management boards. How do you think about such quotas? And is this also something imaginable for Europe or for the US overall as well?
So, quotas are interesting in that I prefer to have people think about targets. But the reality is we do what we measure, whether it's business results or whatever, we do what we measure. And the fact that there's so many underrepresented minorities, when you look at the top of corporations, when you look at board representation, is a thing that does need to be addressed. And sadly, we as corporate folks should be behaving in our own enlightened self-interest, because all of the research shows that when you have diversity on the board, when you have diversity in senior management, your company performs better, right? So for our shareholders, for our employees, for the clients we serve, it's a better thing for us to have diversity in leadership, whether it's board leadership or senior executive leadership. So, quotas to me are controversial in that, they're a legal requirement, but, targets, things that we measure and hold people accountable for. So you can do that by saying, here's IBM, they have good representation on their board, or here's company ABC and they don't. And look at the performance. IBM is performing better. There are lots of ways to hold corporations accountable just by publishing their diversity or lack thereof, without a legal quota per se. But we all ought to be acting in the corporate world in our enlightened self-interest. It's just hard to change the inertia. So sometimes things like this that at least open the conversation help to change that inertia.
Okay. You've been recognized as a role model by, several awards, and I mentioned most probably not all of them earlier. Is there anything that changed since, you've been on the list, for example, in your commitment or the impact you have in the company or outside of IBM?
So I guess my commitment continues to increase every day, and it's not about being on a recognized list or anything for my personal commitment. But I'm reminded that it's important. I'm privileged to have the IBM brand to stand on, right? To speak out as my night job, because my day job is just a business job, right? But in my night job, I'm privileged to be able to talk about diversity and the importance of bringing diversity, into a valued state of not only inclusion, but equity. And so I think it just reminds me, Albert, that I have to not only speak up, but stand up and then lift up other people, because it's in doing all three of those things, making sure the LGBT plus voice gets heard, standing up for our communities and others like Black Lives Matters, and then focusing on how we lift up those who are coming behind us and make that way easier, so that we're not having the suicide rates of our LGBT youth that are just horrendous. They need to have a vision that they can be successful in whatever career they choose, from sport to business to whatever, right? That being themselves is not a barrier, and that they can succeed. So it becomes actually more of a responsibility, Albert, for me, to make sure that I'm doing that I'm making the way easier for others who come behind.
Such lists are, is basically the responsibility, or no, let's put it that way. Publishing lists like what we plan and did in the last 3 years, is this basically that we give, younger people a visibility and give them a sign? There is, it is possible to be out at work. It is, life as an LGBT person is possible, and you can be fully accepted. Or is there more behind such lists?
Oh, well, the first point is visibility matters. Visibility matters, Albert, and being able to see people who look like you, who are like you, and see that they're successful, whether it's an LGBT list or women's list or Black list, to be able to look up and see that there's the art of the possible, right? For me, and particularly for LGBT folks, Albert, because unlike Black or Jewish or Muslim or whatever other diversity, really, other than perhaps people with disability, we don't grow up in a home. Our family of origin is generally not like us. So if you're a Black kid and you get bullied at school, you come home to a Black family and you have your Black church and they're all supportive and reinforcing. Or if you're Jewish or if you're Muslim, same thing, right? Even though you're getting bullied at school, you've got a support system around you, with your culture and your family. Whereas an LGBT kid, we get bullied at school and we come home to a family of origin who is not like us, generally speaking. And, if we come out, we sometimes get thrown away, right? Or worse, right? So it's very important that for our youth and for our young professionals, that they see their career is not going to stop just because they're bringing their whole self to work. In fact, it's going to get better because they're going to be more productive when they quit hiding, right? The other thing is, you know, again, the word ordinary comes to mind. These lists help everybody understand that this is ordinary. And it's ordinary for LGBT people to achieve and to be really successful in their careers. And we want that to be ordinary. And so having lists like that people get honored and recognized is incredibly important, because not only will you save lives, but you help to change the world.
Mm-hmm. In Germany, it's really, really very difficult to get LGBT executives who are out within their peers in their companies to be willing on such lists. And this morning we received an email that there's this guy who is fearing of being on blacklists by other HR departments so that he can't get a job in other companies anymore.
And see, that would be just the opposite of what's happening, Albert, is because good companies today are embracing diversity, and they actually want people in interviews and in their CVs and resumes to indicate diversity that they can't see by a picture, because we want that more diverse talent. And so it's actually opposite. And in fact, when I first joined IBM as a professional hire, I had no network, but because I was an out executive, I got access to senior executives who wanted to talk to me, who wanted to listen to me. It was actually a competitive advantage for me. And one of my dear friends, Ken Batty, and many people will know Ken, you know, always told the story of his time in HR. He said, not one person ever came to an interview and said to me, you should hire me because I'm just like everybody else, right? You know, so it's a competitive advantage, and companies want diverse executives. They want diverse people. They not only will not be blacklisted, but they will be actually shortlisted to have opportunities. And so what I would say to those German executives, you know, what would you do if you weren't afraid? Where's your courage? Where is your authenticity? You know, are you going to claim who you are? And if you do that, not only will you be better, and your mental health will be better, and your career will be better, but because of your courage, you'll help other people, right?
I hope all those people who are not willing to be on our list are listening to this lunch talk, because these are the arguments I always use to convince them, but maybe they listen to you. That would be really great. We have already questions coming in, and I think I skip for the time being my questions because it's already 4 questions and probably more coming in. There are executives who are convinced that there is no discrimination like queerphobia, racism in their organization. How and who can convince them they are very privileged to take action and engage in the diversity and equity and inclusion? Hope you understand what.
Yeah, I do. And one of the most interesting tools are some of the unconscious bias training. You know, so I recommend that for everybody, right? Because when you actually are confronted with your unconscious biases, you know, that the man should be the executive and the woman should be the nurse, right? Or whatever, you begin to open up your thinking. The other thing I really recommend is a book by Kenji Yoshino, called Covering, right? And in his book, he talks about how everybody covers. So it's not just the LGBT person or the Black person wanting straighter hair or the Asian person not wanting their eyes to be looking Asian. But it talks about straight white males and what they do to cover, you know, whether they're dyeing their hair so they look younger, or, you know, whatever it is. You know, he talks about everybody covering. And this is a way to open a dialogue that includes everybody, even that straight white male who has privilege and doesn't see discrimination for other people. You know, getting that type of education, recommending those kinds of readings. But unconscious bias training is very, very powerful. But there are also other really good sources out there that include all of us, because all of us have insecurities. All of us have things we do cover to make sure we're not, you know, out of the mainstream, right? I laugh because, you know, I've talked with people about Kenji's book and this notion of covering. And I said, look, I don't dye my hair. I'm an out lesbian, but I don't tell people I'm a lawyer, right? I cover the fact that I have a law degree, you know, and everybody laughs because we all cover something. We all cover something. And this is a way, again, for us to connect with our common humanity, right?
Yeah. Yeah, Kenji's book is a very good book. I also recommend it. What my personal experience, which is what's also very powerful, is what at my time, I guess it's still done at IBM, that senior executives meet people from underrepresented groups from their employees. Like, you know, meeting LGBT people and just listening to them, you know, what
Yes.
do you experience down there? And this is also very eye-opening to get.
Yes,
real
we do
stories.
those. Yes, sorry to interrupt. Yes, we do those roundtables and they're very powerful. We also do reverse mentoring where, you know, that straight white male who doesn't believe, and I did that for one of our executives in Europe probably 15 years ago. Oh, you know, there's no discrimination. And so we sat and we had conversation, and I was his reverse mentor, right, to help him understand the experience of not only women but LGBT plus in Europe at the time. And he became one of our biggest allies. In fact, he became a senior vice president sponsor of the LGBT plus group at IBM. But he was one of those people who said, oh, there's no difference. So having that reverse mentoring relationship where you can have that safe one-on-one conversation where he could ask dumb questions, right, in a safe space, was very powerful.
Yeah. A question from Celine. What do you tell white middle-aged male about diversity, also in management? That diversity is a winning factor for each employee and the company. What white male wins to acknowledge diversity? How can they benefit from diversity?
Well, so I tell them, I ask them, what's their favorite team sport? Okay. So if they're in the US, they'll say American football or basketball or baseball. If they're in Europe, they'll say proper football, right? Or, you know, if they're in the Nordics, they'll say hockey. Or if they're in the Netherlands, they say proper hockey and they mean field hockey, you know, whatever that sport is. And I say, okay, who's the most important player? Right? In American football, they'll say quarterback, you know, proper football, they'll say striker, you know, whatever. They all have a favorite player. And I said, okay, fine. I will give you a team of all quarterbacks or all strikers or all whatever. But I'm going to take a team of all the diverse positions and skills. And we're going to play each other. Which of us is going to win? And they look at me and they say, damn, Claudia, you are. And I said, yeah, I'm going to win every time. And so all of a sudden the light bulb goes on for these straight white middle-aged males that, you know, if they have a team of all strikers or all quarterbacks, you know, they're going to lose every time to a team that is diverse, to clients who, you know, as you come in and do your pitch with all white middle-aged males will say to you, you don't look like us. We don't want you to be our supplier, our partner. We want a partner who looks like us, who reflects our values, right? But that team sport story, that you know, that metaphor for diversity is very, very powerful, and the light bulb does go on. So yeah, use it.
Good. There's a question from an anonymous person coming in. What would be the best question of coming out at work if the candidate was not asked about their sexual orientation during the interview? And there are no such opportunities to highlight these aspects as otherwise, other than the information in LinkedIn groups and social media, which was likely not spotted by the hiring manager because it was not part of the interview package. So should I wait until after the probation period is over, or use the Pride month in June to do that even before the end of the probation in October?
Right.
Good question.
So it's a good question. And what I would say is be ordinary. Be ordinary. You know, if during your probation period, one of your colleagues says, "How was your weekend?" And you say, "My partner and I went to the lake," or whatever, you know, have that ordinary conversation. In fact, today in our virtual world, we're all learning more about each other's personal life, right? You know, the dog jumps on my lap and we have a conversation about my dog in the middle of a business meeting, right? Or somebody's kids come in and want to hold up their homework or their picture they've drawn for their mother. Be ordinary, right? Make it a non-issue. Make it a non-issue, and other people will make it a non-issue too, right? Unless you want to say, you know, one in the interview, one of my competitive advantages is I bring X to the table because I am openly gay or lesbian or bisexual, transgender, or whatever. You know, I'm openly LGBT because I bring an authenticity, I bring a resilience, I bring an openness, I bring new ideas for innovation because I've had a different experience. I've had a different journey, and I bring a different set of skills to the table, including, you know, my own authenticity, which will help me engage with our teams, with our clients. You know, use it as a competitive advantage if you want, you know, just like you would in an interview about, well, you know, I have an MBA from so-and-so and I've got experience over here, so you should hire me because I'm different. So those are two ways to approach it: being ordinary and using it as a competitive advantage, right? And in an interview, if you are interviewing with a company that is not open, that is not diverse, that is not going to be accepting of who you are, that's good to know then, because you're interviewing them as much as they are interviewing you. And you want to be in a place where you can be authentic, where you can bring your whole self to work, because then you'll be very good at what you do, and other companies will want to steal you and you will progress in your career. So I would want to know, and I would want to interview that company or that person interviewing me. Is this a safe place? Is this a welcoming place? Is this an inclusive place? Because that will be important too.
A very typical thing in the German-speaking area, so Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, is that there's a gay organization and a lesbian organization. Why should we cooperate more together? It's a question coming in from a really engaged lesbian friend of mine.
You know, part of it is, you know, there's room for both, right? There's room for places where women can have conversations for the, you know, about their experience, and men can too. But, you know, it is at the intersectionality, right? It is, we have a common experience, even though there are very much differences in that, right? Sometimes I don't want to be lumped into LGBT plus. You know, and that's true for our transgender community too, right? Our bisexual community. They have different topics and interests and needs that they need to specifically be able and comfortable addressing, right? And we who are not transgender need to learn. And that's why being together to learn about their experience so I can be a good ally, right, is important. Where our men learn what it means to be a good ally, not only for the lesbian, bi, and trans women, but other women as well. Where we learn about other aspects, whether I'm a lesbian of color, right, or, you know, a disabled lesbian. That intersectionality and our willingness to learn is very important. Now, that doesn't negate the need to actually have some community of our own, right? Whether I'm trans and want to understand the experience of other trans people, right? And their journeys and how I navigate, that would be very important to me. And it's important for that trans community to teach the other parts of the acronym how to be good allies. Does that help? Does that answer that?
I think so. What I always experience in LGBT networks is that they basically mirror the workforce of the company, meaning it's very male dominated. And I always recommend the men in the LGBT networks try to engage the women and make space for women, because there's so much to gain from them as well, rather than just, you know, overlooking them.
Yeah, and it's important for the men, Albert, to understand and listen, yeah, to and execute on what the women want, because a lot of times women are not wanting to go out and have a bunch of drinks. Maybe they want to have dinner and conversation, right? You know, so listening to what other elements want, need, prefer, right? And sitting down and having dinner and conversation instead of standing up and having a drinks reception. Maybe something as simple as that to make the women or others feel included, right?
Thank you. We're actually running out of time, but I have two questions and maybe you can give a short answer to both of them. The first one is, a lot of companies are now, you know, pride of themselves and have a 100% HSE rating, or, you know, workplace, what's it called, the Stonewall Index. So, right. But it not always reflects the actual corporate culture. Do we need new benchmark systems or ways of benchmarking?
I don't think it's about benchmarking, Albert, as much as it's about educating, right? And so in order to educate, we've got to have the courage to step up and have our voices be heard, you know, speak up, stand up, lift up, right? Such that, you know, a corporate experience can be totally done by a bad manager, right? My experience can be horrible because I have a bad first line manager. And so my ability to speak up and my ability to go to an HR place and say, I have a solution, I have a proposed solution, that we do some unconscious bias training, because there's a lot of bias down here in the middle. It's one thing to have the top of the business get it, right? And have that as a value. It's another thing to have the grassroots business resource groups or employee resource groups. But in the middle, it's hard. It's hard. And so we have to make sure that we're not just saying, oh, well, this is just a bad company. If you like your company, if you like what you do, if you like what your company does, then it's incumbent upon you to make it better, to come up with solutions, to make that middle layer, that first line manager, be educated. Because at the end of the day, most people are not bad people. Most people are just not aware, or they're not educated, or they're, you know, most people will want to be better, right? So we've got a responsibility to be authentic and to focus on solutions, right?
And the very last question, and I read an interesting aspect in it. How may we as LGBT visible activists increase understanding of the LGBT family values? Would the promotion of the rainbow families help increase LGBT inclusion in society and reverse some of the stereotypes about the LGBT people?
It's a very long question. So, you know, part of what anything we have to do to reverse stereotypes is to be visible, right? And the other thing that we've just done recently at IBM, and I don't know why it's taken us so long to do this, but we've created an LGBT plus family group, right? And so that's not only LGBT plus people with families, you know, having children, whatever, but it's everybody who has an LGBT plus person in their life. So parents are loving this group because they're finding other parents they can talk with. You know, it was incredibly powerful when our senior vice president for HR came to that group and talked about having a trans child, right? I mean, we all got goosebumps. And she helped more parents in that forum by just having the conversation and knowing that our family combinations are all valuable, right? And that there is somebody out there who has a gay parent, or, you know, a gay nephew, or, you know, a lesbian daughter, you know, and there's a place I can have a conversation. So this has been a very powerful corporate addition of this LGBT family network to our business networks. So I highly recommend it.
Okay, thank you very much, Claudia. We are a little bit over time now, so thank you very much for spending all your time and giving us all your insights. I guess you all agree that Claudia is not an ordinary person. She's definitely an outstanding person, I would say. I really personally feel honored that you took the time to talk with me. It's always a great pleasure to learn from you, honestly. And I'm sure many people know I'm sorry. I'm sure many people could take a lot with them from your insights you gave us. We know each other for more than 15 years, and you were my mentor at IBM. You definitely had a big impact on me, and you are still a very important role model for me, Claudia, honestly. And I hope you are now also a role model for many others out there.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you. Let me make one more comment, Albert, because as people are considering whether to be on lists or to be on role models, it's important for a couple of reasons. First of all, for you personally, to believe that your authenticity matters, that you yourself matter. And then you help others feel like they belong. They belong in the corporate world. They belong in whatever business or activity they're doing professionally. And you're also helping them to believe that they matter. So, you know, believe, belong, and matter, right? That's what you're helping other people to do, because they can see you, because you're willing and you have the courage to be visible. So my last thought is, please be visible, be out, be courageous, and be authentic.